Hello and welcome to another episode of They Don't Teach This in Law School. I'm your host, Charley Mann of Law Firm Alchemy. And just like we've been doing a whole bunch this year, we have something different for you yet again. But I promise you're going to really enjoy this because it will tread in a collective past and have great ideas for the future. And I'm going to be joined by a near lifelong friend, or at least as close as it gets for someone like me who moved around a bunch as a kid. A lifelong friend of mine, also a member of Team Law Firm Alchemy. And what we're going to talk about is the answer that I'm going to give now to the age-old question: what is the one thing they don't teach you in law school? Which in this case is going to be how to bring a sense of performance into what you do as a law firm owner. Now, I understand some law schools may talk a little bit about performance in the courtroom. That can be a very important aspect. Obviously, if you go and do any trial courses, they'll talk about presentation in the courtroom. But we want to talk about how you bring that sense of theatricality and performance, which, by the way, marketing legend Dan Kennedy, legends like Tony Robbins, Jay Abraham, they talk about theatricality. They talk about performance openly and its value in creating success in your life. So this is going to be a fun one. Multi-part series. We've got a lot of places that we're going to go with this, but I'm going to be joined throughout this series by my longtime friend, Bryan Austin. Bryan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Charley. I am ecstatic to be on the other side of the camera. This is so much fun.
And for those of you who don't know,
this is a hoot and a half.
Bryan has actually been getting the podcast out the door for us over the last 6 months, give or take, maybe more. He is the ghostwriter of the soon-to-be-released book, They Don't Teach This in Law School. So he's been doing a lot of behind-the-scenes work. We'd always talked about an opportunity, hey, for him and I to talk in front of the camera or, over the headset, I guess, for those of you who are listening. And because I've known Bryan for such a long time, this may result in some of the silliest episodes of They Don't Teach This in Law School we have ever produced. And if you're not okay with that, just wait. We'll come back to the normal rigor and, precision, machine-like precision that you've come to expect from They Don't Teach This in Law School, which is in and of itself a joke. We work like clockwork that has been banged against the ground over and over again.
You're one of those Salvador Dali clocks that's melted.
That's right. We're a little melty.
This was your disclaimer. There will be silliness.
There will be silliness. So this idea of theatricality and performance, Bryan and I both have a background in theater. The reason that we know each other is because we met in high school doing theater. I was a sophomore. Bryan was a freshman. He was more into the theater stuff than I was at the time. Like, he was already a layer or two deeper than I was in it. And I started doing it in sophomore year, but we became fast friends, knew each other throughout high school, went to different colleges, still stayed in touch and everything over the years. But Bryan, you've taken theater a special distance. So for people to understand more about you, like, share some of the cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I decided when I was 12 that I wanted to tell stories, and that the medium through which I would do that would be theater. And I think it's so funny that you give me the credit for having a head start. The immediate thought that came to mind was like, oh yeah, I did have a head start, but it was by like a couple of months, which when you're young is such a longer track. Like I didn't, right. I beat you by a hair, but back then, I was a couple of shows deep. And the most formative years of my theatrical education, I think, like yours, were, high school. We had a radically different theater program that instilled in us really formative lessons of what is good art, what is great connection, and what is it to work well as a cog of a larger machine to create something bigger than you.
Yes.
So already I was instilled with a really interesting way to tell stories. And I never really deviated from that track. I knew I wanted to tell stories. I knew I wanted to connect with people. I knew I wanted to be on stage in some capacity or another. And so I was really bad at paying attention to anything else. It took a long time to arrive at this lesson that everything is connected, and everything you you pick up in the world, if you go through an artistic lens, will connect you and bring you home to your art. So I didn't really deviate from this track of like, I want to get on stage, I want to perform, I want to learn how to audition, I want to learn the business aspects of it. I want to learn what it is to be a working actor. I want to get really, really comfortable with starving, because that's what you hear, right? If you're going to work, you've got to be so hungry that you're willing to have that be the most important thing. And I got out of college and realized how incredibly skewed that model is, how incredibly wrong that model is. There's a fantastic book called Real Artists Don't Starve. And it took a while to learn that lesson. But I got out of college and I got to do exactly what I wanted to do. I auditioned, I worked for a few years at regional theaters, saw the country, had really rich experiences. And I won't say I hated it, but there was something, it wasn't satisfying me the way I thought it would. I was still missing a component. I realized that the things that I valued most about doing the work had nothing to do with getting on stage and performing. When that curtain came down, I was left wanting more, and I didn't understand what to do with that. Meanwhile, I got really good at teaching myself how to do things. I realized one of the things I loved most about the profession was learning new things, meeting new people.
Yeah.
And it was around 2012. I had this great offer to go to Texas and do a summer of Shakespeare. They were going to pay for my travel. They were going to feed me. They were going to house me. I was going to be like, it was like Lady and the Tramp. I was getting taken off the street. This is so great. And I ran in the exact opposite direction. I did what any rational person would do. And I went to a clown school in the redwood forests of California.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. I had a class on handstands. It was great. I can still to this day.
I mean, the truth is, sometimes when you're learning things like live theater, unfortunately, some of the jokes about the arts, they are relevant. I remember a class in college that I referred to as college age kindergarten. It was a breath work and a speech class. And we played with pillows, learning the phonetic alphabet for like 4 hours.
Yeah.
You know?
Oof. Yeah. We sort of infantilize it and we make it silly, but so much of the arts, and I think this is life as well, is getting back to that wildly accepting and confident place you were as a child. Because you didn't sit when you were a kid and say, oh, I don't know if I can do this. Oh, that feels too scary. You did it with incredible resilience. And we lose that. We lose that as we get older. We get afraid of the world. Our sort of sensors start talking to us. So
hold on. Before we get back to the clown college and continue that, I want to add something to that, because I actually really like what you're expressing there, Bryan. About getting back to yourself and that like childlike experience. Because yes, my issue with the way that was taught and this trying to bring out the goal of the teachers, like she wanted people to cry and have this childlike moment. But the problem was it was strictly facilitated for people who probably already had a level of perhaps trauma, existing vulnerability, and a crack through which it was already spilling, that hopefully it would come out, rather than it being through real strong teaching and strength of leadership. It was a little bit of like cross your fingers type of approach to teaching. Like, I really hope this works out, rather than trying to make it happen like a good director in theater.
Yeah.
If they're looking for something on the stage, they're going to keep pushing and finding new angles and asking questions until they see what the vision happen. And this like kindergarten experience felt infantilizing as a student. It felt legitimately silly, and perhaps I wasn't prepared for that experience, nor did I necessarily deem it necessary. But I also just wanted to do the work of production rather than do the breath work, which I personally felt like was a waste of time. I'm so used to doing things like learning those things while doing a show, while doing a performance of some kind, rather than tucking it away in the classroom. So that's my personal gripe with it. But we also came from a space where, Russ Staggs, being our theater teacher in high school, he found space for people. The ensembles got bigger every single year that we were there. And he found space for people to come in and do shows. And even in the drama classes that he taught, the vast majority of it was, we're doing scene work. We're doing scene work and we're working on stuff as we do scene work, which for me is always a preferred methodology. Okay, veered off into that territory. I'm grabbing the wheel of the car and I'm bringing it back over the rocky road. We're getting it back up onto the highway. Clown College.
And it was wild. A huge component of it was moving, speaking, and writing, and blending all of those things together. So you'd sit and you'd run a mile, and then you'd have a 10-minute free write in the midst of a cool down. You'd take that free write, and then you would make a piece of theater from that, and then you would circle back. And it was these creative gymnastics, like artistic CrossFit for all intents. This mingling of mind, body, and spirit in creating. I mean, this was the redwoods of Humboldt County. There were hippies.
You say that both lovingly and as if it were a threat.
Yeah, no, there's a. I don't want to get off the rails. There's a great story. Well, now I have to tell the story.
Yes.
There were a band of traveling hippies that passed through the town, and I have a hat. I have this wide brim hat that I bought in when my first professional contract in 2009, and I was like, this is going to be, every old man has a good hat, and I was like, this is my old man hat. Like, this is my get off the plane hat. This is my Indiana Jones hat. And so I of course brought this hat cross country, and this band of roving hippies somehow got my hat. Like, I had made some comment of like, oh, I like the feathers. And one of them was wearing a top hat. I was like, I like the feathers in your top hat. And I was like, that. And they were like, that's great. Can I see your hat? And I was like, sure. So like, we did a hat swap, and then they disappeared. And I was left with this top hat that I then realized had a hollow top. So just a hole in the top. And so I invented this phrase of getting hippie tricked. And I eventually tracked them down. And when I did, they had taken and put like pheasant feathers and chicken feathers in my hat and dressed it up. But where was it going?
There were hippies in the area. That was the only thing.
There were hippies. So it really sparked something in me. And there's a form of theater that oftentimes in practice is better in process than it is in product. And that's devised theater. And that is where it's a lot of what we did with Russ, where it's, you get in a group, and in the course of this sort of creative crucible, you were going to make something together. Everyone has a voice. Everyone's thoughts are welcome at the table, built and framed around sort of those core rules of improvisation. And I realized how much I liked working in free fall as an artist. I realized how much I loved when I could have a say in what's made on stage. And that led me into the work that I've made a career doing with the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation in Virginia. For the past decade or so, I've been sort of their resident scholar on James Madison, dressing up in funny clothes and creating works of theater every day, often on the fly. And that's been a whole heck of a lot of fun, and really, really formed who I am as an artist, how I love to learn. And I think even now I tend to approach everything I do. And you know this about me since we began our collaboration over a year ago, which is also one of the best things that's happened to me, being able to like make work with you as an adult and continue that spirit of what got us involved in how we work at the onset. Is that same love of learning, that same challenge, and that new way and new stage with which we can engage an audience. Because that's really, that's all theater is. Theater is one of those first branded messages of mass comms in marketing, predating even in some respects the written word. How we showed our brand, how we demonstrated who we are, was theater. And so it's going to be a cool conversation to get to talk about how the elements of that play into people's law firms, people's businesses, and how they can take what's already in their bodies that
Mhm.
they are at their core and wake up some of that to make their firms grow.
One of the lessons that I didn't know we were learning in high school when we were learning from Russ Staggs, that I ended up seeing happen in front of me when I studied abroad briefly in London. Like it was a winter program, right? So it was like 4 weeks in London. But while there, I saw something somewhere between 12 to 17 shows. I can't remember, but a lot of live theater. What I realized that Russ had taught us, and I think is such an important lesson, was the value of performance for the audience, not just performance for the actor. We also had a program, Shakespeare in the Grove, that Mr. J was the director of that for a long time, and that was outdoor live theater. And we would have an audience that, I mean, outdoors, big space, street isn't that far away, so there's this low hum of vehicles coming by, and people who are stretched perhaps 50 yards, 60 yards back from the stage, and learning to perform for an audience like that in a way that is so similar to British theater and British acting compared to American acting. American acting is much more internalized. It's almost like the greatest value is that I, the actor, get to experience this. I am going to let you be so lucky as to watch me experience this, as opposed to the more British school of theater, which is, in my estimation, far more respectful of its audience and considers it an equally participatory journey with even a level of prioritization for the audience. And I say that because that lesson has led to it's almost a thesis of how I like to approach business and how I encourage law firm owners to approach business, which, one of our core values at Law Firm Alchemy is intention. And one of those intentions, think about, is what is the experience of the person on the other side? When we design a workshop, when we design anything, we really do think about the experience of the person on the other side. And I mean, so you are the correct term is interpreter. Is that when the live performance for you?
So if we get into the sort of the bones of it, we call it an interpreter, and my work would be first person interpretation. So I am experiencing the historical events I'm talking about. I'm going through it. I'm through the guise of a character using these teaching tools. I think that's the technical term. I'm just as comfortable calling myself a storyteller because it bleeds into all the other work that I do. But
so you go and live in the world at Colonial Williamsburg. Like you go in there and you are James Madison while you are there. However, of course, you have this strange dichotomy between the experience of the past and the obvious fact of the existing presence that you're in. And you have to layer on this experience for people who are coming through Colonial Williamsburg and want to interact with James Madison. And I'm curious for yourself as a performer, Bryan, that idea of how much of it is about your experience versus the person who might be asking you questions or who wants to take a selfie with James Madison, how you create an experience there.
Yeah, you become incredibly flexible at connecting and meeting somebody exactly where they are. If the only thing they want is a picture, that doesn't diminish that experience or the quality of that experience you can give them. Everyone wants to have deep conversations. Everybody wants to make a connection. So after the 1000th picture that day, you can sit and say, "My God, is this what I went to school for? I used to do Shakespeare. I don't want to tell you where the bathroom is. Like, no, I can't tell you where a good place to eat or where the nearest Panera is. No, I don't want to do that. I want to talk about the U.S. Constitution."
Yeah.
But it gets back to sort of those most fundamental ideas, which is if a person doesn't have their most fundamental needs met, if they don't feel safe, they're never going to connect into a space. And so I work in all elements. I have worked in the rain. I have worked in the snow. I have worked with passing coal trains that completely shatter any suspension of disbelief that we are in 17 and 75. You work outdoors and you become incredibly flexible at saying, okay, how can I pivot this? How can I, with a wink and a nod, make it almost a magic trick where I look at somebody and say, I know I'm not this person. I know I'm not this person, but I'm going to do this with such precision and care that even though you logically know it, for a moment, you are going to believe and be somewhere else. And I think that regardless of the tiers of how these things go, it becomes an incredibly enriching work. I had for a long time a pen pal, or rather James Madison had a pen pal. I know how to do a lot of weird things because of this work. I can ride on horseback, I can farm, I can cut a quill and ink, and I can write with it. And so I had a pen pal for a time, and that pen pal wrote James Madison. She would send James Madison eggs from her farm. She would, do all of this. And she just graduated and is in college now and talks about what a formative experience that was to be able to experience history and culture and life in that way. And so I enjoy the connectivity of it. I enjoy the wide extended family that I've made because of that work.
So this is what I love about the power of performance. And I think performance can, when we're talking about like the law firm business success space overall, I know sometimes people can hear the word performance and feel like it collides in opposition with authenticity, which is obviously another word that gets preached quite a bit. I don't see them as antithetical to each other. I think if it's performance for performance sake, if you're doing something that is so far out of character, to use the theatrical reference, it's like when someone is we've both seen this. Someone is performing in a show and they figured out how to get a great laugh, but it's by doing something that is not within the character's boundaries whatsoever. But as a performer, they're addicted to the idea of getting that laughter from the audience. And that can spiral out of control. And suddenly, without them knowing it, it kind of topples the illusion of the entire show. And that's why performance and authenticity can go hand in hand, because an improv done in an even well-scripted show that seems to come deeply from within the character can be an authentic experience for both the performer and the audience in that moment. And when you, as an attorney, you, the listener, you have consultations that you do. Obviously, there are phone calls, the work in trial, sales, etc. That element of performance is a way to actually let your authenticity through. So let me loop it back, Bryan, to bring forward that childlike state thing. But it's not even childlike state. It's just, I'm a rambunctious individual. There was a long time where I used to suppress my level of energy because it didn't feel quote unquote professional for me to be this happy-go-lucky, essentially, to just basically be having fun. And when I started letting go of that and focused on that level of authenticity, my performance improved, my ability to perform for people. And even when we map out things like events, we map them out as if it were a performance. And one of the things that we talk about is energy management of our audience, right? Like it's consideration of what is the audience experiencing. You and I have done Shakespeare. That is much like, I would say, I would consider it analogous to talking law with people, in that there are these little rays of sunshine, these little pinpoints of light that people are looking through, and they're like, I can see something, but I can't see the whole picture here. And the best Shakespeare performances open that gap wider and wider to where they can see the greater picture rather than having individual moments where they go, I think I understood what that word meant, or I recognize that speech from 11th grade English class. Instead, they start seeing, oh, this is the whole experience right now. That type of, let's open this world to the audience. Let's be intentional. Let's invite them in. Let's perform in a way that is deeply respectful of them, but also allows me to be my whole self. It is weird and it is complicated. And yet I also feel like it's weirdly simple. This whole idea of be yourself at the highest level.
Yeah, I think that is so. There's this illusion from the outside that masterful performance is the art of completely becoming another person.
Hmm.
In my experience, that is a fallacy. I think the great secret to good performance is knowing and being at home in yourself so incredibly well that you can dial certain traits down, raise others, and in that you're always being yourself. You are just operating at the frequency requisite and needed to tell this specific story. And when
Hmm.
you do that, the level of connection that you can experience is uh, directly correlated to how authentic you are able to be. You know, why, Charlie, should you ever be anything else than a Labrador wagging his tail? Why? Because the fact of the matter is, you're going to bring the people to you, and this is, I think, true for law firm owners as well. You are going to bring the people you need to you so much better by bringing the energy you have to begin with. Because if you try and dilute that, if you try and be something you're not, if you expend energy trying
Hmm.
to cultivate the people you think you need, you're going to bring exactly who you ask to your table, but they're not going
Hmm.
to be the people that you actually need. By being yourself, you bring your audience, you bring your market to you.
Yeah.
And the energy translates so much better because of that. The energy um, builds and stacks on itself. You're able to do with others what you cannot do with yourself.
There's this whole concept in marketing of you must equal parts attract and repel. And most people try and avoid this inherent truth by neutering themselves,
Hmm.
effectively taking away anything that resembles the most attractive parts of their being. And by, of course, trying to get rid of what some people may consider the repulsive parts of them. And we end up in this. It's actually funny. This whole, I'm a rambunctious human being. One of the reasons that I turned it down is because I would get feedback when I would give talks, and it'd be on stage presenting at events, like, oh, he needs to tune it down a little bit. He's talking too fast. Uh, Basically stuff saying, hey, buddy, chill out. And I started doing that. I started altering myself to appease those people. And now I've done selling from the stage, where I'm selling a coaching program, an info product, et cetera, to a couple hundred people at a time from the stage. Looking back, the exact correlation between when I sold the most and when I sold the least was between when I was my most and when I was my least of
Hmm.
myself. And you look back in those lessons and you wonder, boy, oh boy, those people who didn't like the way that I performed, which, by the way, every attorney out there knows that there are people who are going to like the way that you handle a trial or a consult, and there are people who are not going to like it. There's not just some middle of the road magical place. Middle of the road, it goes back to and I can never quote it quite right, but the biblical verse: "Be neither hot nor be either hot or cold, for if you are lukewarm, I will spit you out of my mouth." That is a tension as well. You need to be hot or cold. If you are lukewarm, people will forget about you. Stand for something or you stand for nothing. Like, all of these aphorisms, phrases, idioms that we can toss out there come back to this idea of the most attractive people are the people who, for many, are entirely repulsive.
Hmm.
And sometimes they're repulsive just because they would be attractive to other people. Some people hate Taylor Swift because she's Taylor Swift. So be it. That's fine. Some people hate Brad Pitt because he's Brad Pitt. So be it. That's fine. That's how the game gets played. Now, coming back to that performance aspect of it, which, by the way, just named two performers there, right? Those are the people who immediately come to mind. Coming back to that performance aspect of it, you were talking about, embodying James Madison. I'm curious, just from like my own perspective, Bryan. A lot of attorneys. So Todd Herman wrote a book called Alter Ego.
Mm.
which has to do with the idea of putting essentially on a mask and a character to help you perform better in certain situations. I know that there are attorneys who do that, perhaps not consciously. You do it in a very big way with the merger of James Madison and Bryan Austin. I'm curious where Bryan Austin comes through in that and how you keep yourself while embodying another person.
That's a great question. Um, it comes and manifests in several unique ways. Um, at this point, I've been playing this character for so long
Right.
because I started him at 25, which is the age he kind of entered into public life. I'm 37 now. It's a unique way to explore history when you're studying him at parallel with what's going on in your life, and
Mm-hmm.
you go through, you see the seasons of his hardship as you go through the seasons of yours, and there are a couple things that happen. One, it's sometimes a lot more serene to spend a day being him because I know how it ends. I have his death date, so I'm free. I'm good. I know how the ending is. I know it works out. I know the ways in which it works out well. But what it has cultivated in me is there are essentially three Bryans.
Hmm.
There is the Bryan fully as Madison. There is the Bryan public facing, out of character, still performative because you're dealing with the public. I'm spending time in character and out of character. I guess that would be where a lot of people's uh, performative mask starts. Who are you for the public? Who are you in work meetings? How do you cultivate connection? And then there is the most sort of private centric Bryan that you choose who you give that to. You give that to family. You give that to deep personal friends. You keep
Mm-hmm.
that for yourself. And these parts communicate with one another at all times to figure out how do you preserve your intention and meet your needs, settle those various ends, and what do you do when you're in a grocery store, shopping with your child and someone says James Madison, you know which mask do you put on, which face do you put on? But what it inevitably leads to is this sort of like two lives for the price of one kind of avenue
Mm-hmm.
where the biggest change, the biggest revelation that I had is the depth of what you can learn and what you can
Mm.
absorb when it is integral for your work and the connections that you made. I was not a very good student. School did not suit me well. And it led
Mm.
me to the conclusion that I was not very smart. And I've had that challenged because of this work that I've done. I think it's very similar from what you've experienced. You've
Yeah.
watched you watched what I did after school, Charlie. I watched what you did after school. How
Yeah.
you have connected to people, the skills that you have mastered and developed, and the ways that we've been working together for a year. The ways that you teach those skills to command excellence, and from the people that you're working with. And I think it's that further proof of when it is relevant to what you're called to do, uh, it is so much easier to learn.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and I think that, I wonder sometimes with law firm owners if they bristle at this idea of sitting and us talking about performance in their work, if they get sort of
Yep.
frighted at this idea of, well, no, I'm introverted, that's not me, I can't do that with my firm. These are tools, and this is a practice that
Mm-hmm.
anyone can do, that anyone can implement, to be able to cultivate and instill that sense of play, to learn what it means to sit and look at what your staff, your clients are offering and say yes, and those key rules of improvisation, of performance, of the word that was instilled into us, Charlie, which is ensemble. What is it to try and let go of doing it by yourself and becoming another part of a machine?
Mm-hmm.
um, you know so yeah, it's been a fascinating journey. It continues to be a fascinating journey. And I often say, I fell into doing this work completely by accident, with the
Mm.
knowledge that it's the work I've always wanted to do.
Yeah.
uh, but it shows what happens when those happy accidents happen, and you say, that magic if that comes from Stanislavski and his acting methods of, what if I was this? What if this thing did exist? It has cultivated in me a curiosity, which makes me look at every instance and say, how does this work? How do I do something like that? And what happens if I, authentically showing up as myself, put some energy into this? What might happen? And like I look at that with the work we've done in the past year. You have a book that's about to be coming out, which I am so thrilled and excited about. There are so many things coming down the pipeline. We have Catalyst, which is consistently occupying our energy to produce really wonderful content for its members that I love working on because I selfishly get to benefit from it. We have so many elements of play and projects occupying us that I think would make those teenage kids learning how to be artists back in the early 2000s incredibly happy.
Yes. I would like to think so. Yes, I would like to think so. There's something that, there's several things that you touched on there that we will tuck away for our next episode in this series, including when you are performing, or how do you build up yourself as a performer to where you can turn it on, let it run its magic while your mind may be elsewhere. This is an interesting, fascinating topic that I've discussed before. There are times when I'm giving talks where once you know your subject matter well enough, my brain has 3 separate tracks that are running at the same time. I've written about this. We'll talk about this. We're going to talk about improv and how that functions and how to bring it into your law firm, whether it's improv internally or how improv skills get used in the sales process, in consultations, just in making your clients happy overall. We're going to talk about this idea of having a deadline and being an ensemble, building a project together, and the parallels between building up a law firm and creating a live theatrical show. There's a lot of the technical elements we'll even talk about as well. I look forward to just sharing the idea of cheating out to people, to the audience when you're on stage. There are little technical things that we'll get into. Bryan and I are going to continue this series, which he has titled All the Firms a Stage. I got to give credit where it's due, which, by the way, if you liked the episode titled The Tao of Tony, when we had Tony Albrecht on, that was entirely Bryan's creation. But Bryan, I think I know the episode title for this already, because we're going to have some fun with this. We're bringing joy and exploration into this space. I think the episode title has to be Bryan Got Hippie Tricked, All the Firms a Stage, Part 1. And if people don't click on that episode, I don't know what we're here for. So that's going to be how this goes. Before we go, I'm going to ask a variation of my normal, what are you reading, watching, and listening to question. And it's a specific one for the person whose life you embody and occupy so frequently, which is, what might James Madison during his life have loved to read, to watch, knowing the stage is a possibility, and listen to?
So I'm going to start with Joseph Addison. Joseph Addison is a prolific 18th century philosopher and playwright. His most famous play is Cato, which talks about sort of the end of the Roman Republic, Cato, this mythic figure of Republican virtue. And Cato is where we get the sentiments of give me liberty or give me death, where we just hit the 250th anniversary of Patrick Henry giving that famous speech at St. John's Church. It's where we get Nathaniel Hale's sort of sentiments as he's hanged, which is, I regret that I only have one life to give to my country. All of these very wonderful, stoic classic sentiments, they come from Joseph Addison. But another thing Joseph Addison did, and all of this is on the public domain, which is why I love history and I love the age that we live in, where in our pockets, we have thousands of years of human experience at our fingertips. And if we decide to stop scrolling and looking at cats for a second, we can really find something wonderful. He had a magazine of sorts that he called The Spectator. And what it really was people writing in and observing what they saw on a daily basis, human behavior, uh, classic virtues. It became what's called a commonplace book for the human experience. And Madison was a great fan of The Spectator, so that's a key one. And as far as music, you have the classics. You have Handel, you have Mozart, and you also have a whole retinue of sort of those like classic country tunes that accompany dances. Things you still find on like a Spotify playlist to this day, Flowers of Edinburgh, Soldier's Joy, The Jolly Miller, all of these kind of fun, like all I'm going to say something controversial. All fiddle tunes after a while sound the same, like it's always the same. But really any song like that, yeah, Madison really bops with that. That would be the key one. But Bryan keeps a pretty robust reading list.
Don't worry. Well, save that for an upcoming episode. Don't worry. I'll get Bryan's thoughts on it. I just figured it'd be fun to draw out a little James Madison at the front.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Another thing Madison's a pretty big fan of is Brissot de Warville's Travels Through America. I say that because I just got a historic copy of it to have in my hand, and that's a fascinating read because it's a Frenchman coming to America in 1788. Infant America were independent, and he's sitting and asking this question: okay, as France is looking at fighting for liberty, let me look at this country who's trying to keep it. And he writes about what is America in that weird transitional time between, okay, we're independent, what are we now in building a new government, culturally, socially? And it's a really interesting sort of time capsule of a read.
I love it. That was fun. Thank you. Thank you, Bryan. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to talking with you more about live theater and performance and all these other things. This felt like a delightful preamble with emphasis on the idea of character and the larger arc of performance, and the idea of respecting your audience. Those are the big takeaways from here, and so much to talk about going forward. Thank you very much, Bryan.
It's great to share stage with you again, Charley.
Excellent. We will see you all in the next episode of They Don't Teach This in Law School.